Early on a morning in July 1942, the men of German Reserve Police Battalion 101 were dropped off in Józefów, a little Polish village. It was the day of the first big assignment for these family fathers from Hamburg. They were too old to be of any value for the German Wehrmacht.
With the tears in his eyes, the commander told his men the horrible task they were given. All Jewish men who were fit enough to work had to be gathered for work camps, and all other Jewish people, elderly people, women and children had to be shot dead. But the commander gave his men an extraordinary offer. He said, "Those who do not feel able to perform this task don't have to do it."
One man stepped forward and handed over his weapon. The immediate objection of his officer was turned down by the commander, which showed everybody that deserting wouldn't have any consequences. Yet, only 10 of the 500 men actually withdrew. The massacre of Józefów would go down in history as one of the most horrifying war crimes of the Holocaust.
Afterwards, all men were shocked by their behavior, appalled at what they had done. Why had so few men seized the opportunity of evading these murders? Hardly any of them was anti-Semitic, and none of them had been raised with ideas of the Hitlerjugend and had had really bad experience with Jews. So how come these ordinary men become such beasts?
As a child, I was frequently confronted with the deeds of the Nazi soldiers in the Second World War. With a German mother, I pretty quickly got used to being called Mof, which is the Dutch version for crowd. And as a little child, it made me wonder, are Germans really that bad? I mean, even today, being German often has a negative connotation. So did the men of Police Battalion 101 turn out to be such beasts just because they were German? Or would anyone be able to perform such deeds?
Compared to the beginning of the last century, when people grew up in a system of authority, when order was order, today we have this delusion of having become self-independent and individually independent, determined people. But is this really the case? The rise of Islamic State, the war in the Middle East, the terror attacks closer to our homes in cities as Paris, Brussels, and Nice. Violence provokes so much anger, sadness, and fear in the world. Why do people do this?
Yeah, why do people even go to war? Why don't they just stay at home? As our final school research paper at the Magister Alvinus High School here in Sneek, we decided to research how easily we actually can be manipulated. So in October of 2015, we conducted our own version of the famous Milgram experiment.
In 1951, Stanley Milgram tried to find an answer to the question of manipulability in his quest to explain the horrific deeds by Nazi German soldiers in the Second World War. He made volunteers give electric shocks to other persons to find out what the influence of punishment on learning was, or at least that's what Milgram made his test persons believe. In fact, there were no electric shocks involved at all, and the other so-called test person was an actor. The real test was to see how far this person would go in inflicting pain to another human being.
65% of Milgram's test subjects didn't stop before they had given the final shock, which had a voltage of 450 volts 3 times. Would this have been a real setting, they would have given a deadly dose to another human being. The test person simply did as the instructor asked them to do, without being threatened or forced to do so. Milgram's results gave quite an insight into human conformity and obedient behavior. But this experiment was conducted 55 years ago. Would the results be the same today? Our society has changed a lot in the past 55 years.
And for that reason, we asked 13 and 14-year-old school students in the second year of the Atheneum track, which is the highest level of the Dutch secondary school system, to participate in a short-term memory test, or at least that's what we made them believe. We conducted 3 versions of Milgram's experiment to see how different circumstances would determine how far our test subjects would go when inflicting pain to another human being. The first test subjects were surrounded by a peer group that would push them to go on when hesitating. We wanted to see what effect peer pressure would have on the results.
Yeah. The second version was basically the same as the first one, but this time, instead of peer pressure, we studied the effect of the influence of an authority, which in our case was a tall professor in a black suit. And our last version, the third version, was our baseline measurement, with no pressure by a group or by an authority, to compare the other two versions to.
Despite clear signs of stress, every test person went on until the end of the test, in all the three situations. This means that they didn't stop before giving a shock of 250 volts 3 times and before we told them to stop. They went on because they trusted in our authority and were unreflective about the possible consequences of their actions.
After the recent terror attacks all across the world, we again can see what people are actually capable of when they are influenced in the right, or rather, the wrong way. Despite increasing individualism and the high value given to personal freedom, we believe that the modern people of today are not really different from the soldiers in the First and Second World War. The students of our school obeyed to a seemingly violent command just because they were told to. Order is order. In our research, the behavior of these Dutch pre-university second graders didn't really differ from the behavior of the German Nazi soldiers.
The mainstream educational system in the Netherlands focuses on passing on knowledge to their students, rather than stimulating their personal development. And as great as our high school was, I don't have the feeling that this contemporary system of teaching has made me the person I am today. School was more about learning and reproducing facts, with very little room for reflection and discussion.
In our experiment, we focused on 13 and 14-year-olds. This is the age where young boys and girls are looking for their identity, and many of them come into contact with things like smoking, drugs, and sometimes even things like lover boys for the first time. This is the age they should be given the courage to say no.
Raising people in such a way that will enable them to think and act independently, shouldn't this be the main task of our educational system?
Yeah, we humans are very easily manipulated. The subjects in our experiment were really no exception. In our daily lives, we are constantly being affected by people and situations all around us, as were the men of Reserve Police Battalion 101, and so are we today. But to what extent we let ourselves be influenced, that's our own decision. So try to identify in what way you are being affected and by whom, and try to think before you act. Because after all, the price for freedom is responsibility. Thank you for your time.